Hey, I'm Lane from LainTCG, and I'm back again with an in-depth primer on a deck. Today I'm here with Cendrillmon Puppet Rush, which I think is going to be a pretty exhaustive primer on an overlooked deck. This is going to be specifically my version of it, with the two various engines that you can run in the deck. I've been labbing this for a bit, and I honestly think that this deck is fairly good in the current meta, and I think that I have something pretty unique to add on to this compared to what a lot of people have posted. Even though there's not been a ton of content on this deck so far, I thought that I'd get out and show you guys why I like it and why I think that you should probably be interested in it. This is going to be like a 40-minute video, potentially an hour, like most of my in-depth primers. So there are going to be timestamps below in the description, along with credits like I normally put down there. So if you want to skip around, feel free to go down there. No judgment on my part. I will also have deck lists in the video itself for everything, including the regular archetypal version that people play. So if you're interested in getting on the deck, you can just look at the deck list as well and go from there. So we're going to get into everything now. So basically, we're going to start with the major takeaways. If you're looking to get in on a new deck that's like tier 1.5 and didn't see a ton of play in the Japanese meta and is honestly really budget friendly in my engine versions, then this is the right place for you. Also, this is potentially the first properly competitively viable token strategy in Digimon. I know that Diaboromon is good, and Diaboromon is a fairly good control deck, but as far as like a deck that can actually win games against various strategies, I think that this is much more competitive, and I'll show you why I think so as we go through. But Cendrillmon Puppet Rush is my name for what basically equates to one of three, potentially more in future decks that can use Cendrillmon as well as the EX7 Arisa to spam tokens and level 3 puppets to great effect to win you the game quickly after a few setup turns. That is something that you should be aware. This deck generally takes 1 to 3 setup turns, and if you're going against a tier 1 deck or other tier 1.5 decks, if they draw a perfect hand, you may lose. But if you are at a meta that has some setup turns, or if your opponent doesn't get the absolute nuts, you'll be fine. It excels at spamming small guys on the board, like most rookie rush style strategies, but through your utility cards and top end, you can abuse them to get extra swings for your boss monster, and potentially swings with them, as if you have the starter deck Arisa for Rush, you can get even more swings off. There's also light control elements via DP minus effects on your boss monster and tokens, as well as some other cards that you can run in the deck. I will get into those later. And I'm primarily with this guide going to be going over the two engine variants that I've created in my lists, as opposed to the Shoemon tribal archetypal version, which I will lightly go over on the next page, which is much more expensive, and I find in actual play to be worse. Then followed with the core cards for the strategy before getting into the two versions which I've tested, and that may be interesting for you to try out. So let's get into the rest of it now. So we have the Shoemon tribal version. I'm going to be calling it Archetypal going forward. But basically, this is the most expensive version of the deck, and also the standard one people seem to be running at the moment. It's the one that I see in content that people are making specifically, aside from the Digipanda thing that started me even labbing on this in the first place. Again, shout out to Digipanda. He does a lot of idea videos, and I really like to go off of some of those ideas, and this is me going off the deep end on a handful of the ideas. So, I think this deck is outmoded by the other significantly cheaper versions, but it excels in different places, right? So you have the 4 promo Shoemon in addition to the EX7 Arisa. You can basically, if any of your Digimon die on your opponent's turn, play out a promo Shoemon to slow your opponent's gameplay down for like a turn. So this one is more control focused than like aggro focused. You also have, you know, ShoeShoemon promo and the Arisa promo, which do various things for you. The ShoeShoemon specifically, when you digivolve into it, gives minus security to a Digimon for the turn. And the promo Arisa plays out a Shoemon for free when you play it out, and when you like suspend it, it does 1 reduction if you're going into a puppet Digimon. It's fairly decent. Those cards are good. The things that are significantly different about them is the promo Shoemon and the promo ShoeShoe give DP minus effects when you attack, which is really nice into certain things, right? But is not really necessary to the overall game plan. It's really good for getting rid of ace cards or potential ace cards on their board, but as I'll talk about later, you're going to get rid of them anyway with your like Cendrillmon, so you're fine. You don't really need to worry about that. And also because it runs regular ratios, you generally don't have an issue with seeing your pieces as compared to the engine versions, but you do falter on having enough level 3s to really take advantage of the EX7 Arisa's value, because you run like 12 rookies. I've seen certain lists cut down on things to run 2 Junkmon as well, which helps with that aspect, but kind of takes away some of the other things that make this version better. It's kind of iffy, right? Also, due to the lack of card draw, starter deck Chaperomon must be used to plug in that gap. So I'm not really going to talk about Chaperomon much in this video, so I feel like I should talk about it now. So starter deck Chaperomon, when you have another Digimon on board when attacking, you draw a card once per turn, which is the major problem with it. If it was not once per turn, because Cendrillmon can attack twice per turn, you would be getting 2 card draw off of each turn every single time that you have the egg out, which would be good, even if they like limited it to one other puppet or token. I think it would be very good for this deck, and you would want to consider running it in my versions. I don't run it because I think the DP minus effects are better, and the engines that I've plugged into the deck end up getting rid of the card draw issues that the deck has overall. So I think that the DP minus overall is better for the strategy. So I'm just going to leave it at that. The egg gives minus 2000 DP to your opponent's security for the EX7 Chaperomon, which is the one that I will be assuming you use going forward. But you use the starter deck one in the archetypal version specifically so that you get around your card draw issues with this. All in all, not including the starter decks, the 2 starter decks that you need to like put together this deck, it's $339 currently at time of writing to upgrade after, your starter deck purchases. So that's another, like $40 on top of that. And it doesn't really play much with the built-in engine from EX7 Arisa. And EX7 Arisa is the most interesting part of the deck overall to me. So I wanted to abuse the value that it can gain as much as possible. So going forward, we're going to talk about the key cards to the strategy. As far as time codes go, I'm going to put all of those together. And then we're going to get into the engines themselves after that. So let's get on to that now. So, the most important cards to the strategy period are Arisa Kinosaki, both the EX7 and the ST19. ST19 is less important, but the EX7 is extremely important, right? So the reason the deck functions so well overall, all of the versions of it, and the primary reason why it works competitively at all, is the combination of EX7 Arisa Kinosaki and the ST19 Arisa. So EX7 Arisa is the major player in the deck, and the reason why the deck works at a competitive level. So when any of your tokens, and the deck creates tokens, or puppet trait Digimon are deleted, by suspending her, you may play 1 level 3 Digimon with the puppet trait from your hand without paying the cost, which encompasses a lot of different potential Digimon, and as the game goes forward, we'll probably have more and more value things that you can do with it. It creates a very interesting build around strategy having her, right? Also, she gives the standard 1 memory at the start of your main if your opponent has a Digimon on board, which is, great. So we're going to just go with that. And then the starter deck version is the memory setter, cost of 4. And then when you play a token or a puppet trait Digimon is played by effect, right? You can tap her to give that Digimon played by effect rush for the turn. So the EX7 Arisa is not limited to 1 activation per Digimon dying as well, which we should talk about. So if you have a Shoemon that dies, or you use it for overclock to kill it, so it dies. You can suspend 4 Arisa Kinosaki if you have 4 level 3s in hand to play 4 off of 1 dying. So if you have multiple Arisas in play, you can go positive on Digimon on board after just chumping into security with one of your level 3s to chip, which just pays off huge. The big problem that this deck has is like board wide DP minus, or specifically things that stop you playing by effect, because Arisa is so necessary to the strategy. But you can go extremely plus off of anything dying in this deck. So just keep these 2 cards in mind while we talk about everything else. Now, onto the actual archetype line. So, the Shoemon rookies are very important to the deck for multiple reasons, both their abilities and their inherits. The inherits are extremely important to your overall strategy, so we'll talk about those in a bit. But the starter deck is the best searcher for the archetype by a mile, allowing you to add a puppet trait card, which is basically anything aside from aces that you run in the deck, options, or some of the tamers. Well, all of the tamers for the puppet, right? But for your engine cards, you can add all of them because they're puppets, and then that adds anything in your archetype line as well. And then 1 Liberator trait card, which is anything in the dedicated line, so Shoemon, ShoeShoe, Chaperomon, Cendrill, or Arisa. And if you're running the option, which I do, but you don't need to, Wonder Stomp is also a Liberator tag card, so you can add that as well. And then you add the 3rd card, back to the bottom of your deck. And then EX7 Shoemon specifically has a static ability that when it's on the board, it reduces the cost of Digivolution into any card you run in the deck. So go into any puppet, reduce the Digivolution cost by 1. So it works as like mini acceleration into your top end. Also, as you're going to come to see, the inherit is nothing to laugh at with this deck, so you want to stack as many security DP minus inherits as possible overall. Both of the Shoemons have the same effect, right? So all of your opponent's security Digimon get minus 3,000 DP. So if we're going on the Cheribumon egg, so that's already minus 2, and then Shoemon is minus 3, so if you Digivolve a ShoeShoe on top of it, it's minus 5, which makes it really easy to swing in with some of your stuff, and you'll get in really easily with a lot of things. So now we're going to go into ShoeShoe, right? So honestly, the inherits are the most important part of any of the ShoeShoes that you play in this deck when they're actively on the board, but they do have some nice effects that, we need to go over. So the ST19 ShoeShoe on Digivolve does nothing. It really is just there for a name a lot of the time, but it has a pretty good security effect, so it can play a Liberator trait card from hand or trash without paying the cost, if it's 4 or less. And as I'll show later, both engines throw things in the trash to gain value, so you're doing pretty good off of that. And then it also has Overclock, which shouldn't be overlooked. I'm going to go over what Overclock does now, because it's relevant to the rest of this video. So Overclock, you can specifically, at the end of your turn, delete one of your token Digimon or other specific trait, in this case Puppet Digimon, and then the Digimon can attack without suspending. This is also not once per turn, which becomes relevant later. But you can swing effectively twice with any Digimon that has Overclock. You also cannot stack Overclock triggers. It works the same as a Restormon Superior Mode or anything else that attacks at the end of turn, because you can only pend one attack action properly. Though if you want to kill multiple tokens, you can pay cost to do the effect, but you can only effectively attack with one. I have gotten games with the level 4 ShoeShoemon by hard playing something big and killing it to get the final attack in. So unlike Vortex, you cannot attack immediately with something that you hard drop. But if you have a Shoemon and then you Digivolve into ShoeShoe, and say you drop a ShoeShoemon or a Chaperomon, you can immediately kill it to swing for game if they have no security and no blockers. So it is pretty good, and it does come up on the level 4 even. The EX7 ShoeShoe is the way that you get your Archetype Tamers out on the board. So basically, if you have one or fewer Tamers, you can play one Arisa from your hand, which means you can use the effect to get 2 total on board if you haven't hard played stuff. Both of them also have the minus 3000 DP inheritable effect to your opponent's security. So with your 3 minus effects on just one stack, your opponent's security gets minus 8,000, which is really big and means some of your little tiny things can get into security and not die, which plays into a lot of what this deck does, right? So yeah, that's basically ShoeShoe. ShoeShoe's good. Both of them are good. You want to see them like at all times. You want to have one at least so you can go up your line. And then we have Chaperomon. Both the Chaperomons have incredibly good effects for the deck, right? But the EX7 one is the one you want to max out on. So if you need to cut a level 5 down, and most of my lists cut one level 5, or you want to run generic aces in level 5, you cut the like minus DP Chaperomon. So due to the game plan being about going wide, the EX7 Chaperomon playing out a level 3 puppet Digimon from hand for free synergizes extremely well with the strategy, especially with the engine pieces we're going to talk about in future. And Overclock is great for getting extra swings or safe swings. And it has both. So you can play something out and then immediately kill it if you need to get a swing for game, which comes up. And then the ST19 Chaperomon is removal. It's used best in combination with a swing from Cendrillmon, but can also be hard played for 7 or digivolved into for 3 to do minus 3000 DP if there's only 1 or 2 Digimon on board to something. There should always be 2 if you're digivolving into it generally. But if there are 3 or more, you do another minus 3000 to the single target. So it's minus 6000 to one target in particular, right? Which is very good. Minus DP is extremely good, as most people know. Also, both have one of the best protection effects in the game, stopping your level 6 or level 7, because it's generic, not just Cendrillmon, from leaving the battle area by deleting a token or puppet Digimon. So basically, when this Digimon would leave the battle area other than by one of your effects, by deleting one of your tokens or other puppet trait Digimon, it doesn't leave. And you will always have another Digimon on board. That is what this deck does. So you have a very, very good protection effect that they either need to source strip or wipe your board to deal with. And then Cendrillmon is, the thing that the deck revolves around other than Arisa. So in most versions of the deck now, I do not run the starter deck Cendrillmon at all. Only 4 copies of the EX7, right? She's really the thing that makes the aggro win con work. Arisa's the fuel to get the deck going with your engine pieces, but Cendrillmon gets it done. So for 4, you can Digivolve into her, which is kind of high cost, but makes sense with all of her effects, right? When you Digivolve into her, you may play 1 familiar token. Familiar tokens are yellow Digimon with 3000 DP. They do not have a level if there are level targeting things, which comes up, or play costs at all. And then on deletion, the familiar tokens give one of your opponent's Digimon minus 3000 DP for the turn, which is important. So when you Digivolve into her, you can do that, and then start of your main, you also get a token. So when attacking, and it should be noted, this effect is not once per turn, give your opponent's Digimon minus 6000 DP for the turn. Unfortunately, it doesn't last into your opponent's turn, but it's good enough as it is, right? So even though her Digivolving cost is high, you can immediately attack with her once with Overclock. So if you start at 3 and you put your opponent, put the memory to 1, you will still get to attack with her because of Overclock. And you will immediately put out minus 9000 DP because you kill your token to give minus 3. And then when she attacks without suspending, another minus 6. And you can spread it around. You can choose different things if it would be more beneficial for you to do so. So even though her cost is high, the value is extremely good for the cost. She outputs a lot of aggression with at least 2 swings a turn after you Digivolve into her. So like your next turn, or if you have enough memory the first turn, or 1 safer swing. So like you can swing without having her suspend at all. If your opponent doesn't have blockers, but you don't want to leave it sideways in case they're running like a green deck that could swing over it, right? And depending on the engine, she can also potentially get a third attack due to overclock not being once per turn. I will talk about that later, and I'll show a demonstration of that. But she can technically, by killing a token, if she attacks 3 times, do a minus 21,000 DP in the same turn, and you can spread that around. It's really crazy. It doesn't always work for you, but it is really crazy when it does, right? So we're going to talk about the Sistermon Engine first. My list is behind me. You can look at it. You know, this is what I do, but you can always change things up. You can always change ratios, whatever you like, but this is my basis, and this is how I'll be talking about it, because this is how I've labbed it. So we're going to start with the engine that's a bit more prone to bricking. It's fun and good, but again, more prone to bricking. Though it has some interesting things it can do compared to the Archetype version and the Chessmon version in particular, though we're going to talk about that in a second. So the Sistermon Blanc that you run in this is fuel for your Arisa EX7 value engine. Specifically, you're going to be using either the ST12 or the BT6 to fuel your hand, and Sistermon Blanc Awakened to recycle cards. The Awakened also extends the clock slightly by recovering security for you. And for this one, Wonder Stomp is key. I know not every deck that runs Shoemon runs Wonder Stomp, but this one, you really want to cheat out some of the stuff early, especially if you don't have the EX7 Arisa on the board. So you can cheat out the Sistermon Blanc Awakened that normally costs 5 for 2, and then you can give it Rush because you're playing by effect. It's very nice. I would recommend running it, but there are other things, and we'll talk about that later. At the moment, the cost of this version that I have right behind me, I've done the calculations for you, and that's as of today, the 3rd of October. At the moment, it's $182 to upgrade after 2 of the starter decks, so, add those on. And then potentially $4 for the extra 2 physical training if you don't already have a playset. So basically $132 to upgrade versus how much everything else costs with the promos in the previous one. And most of the extra price on that is the Cheribumon Ace in particular. If you want to change things up for cost reasons, you can. I will talk about why Cheribumon Ace is good later, but you can make this even cheaper if you're switching up aces or secondary cards. So we're going to get into the engine now. Sistermon Blanc engine, we're going to talk about the regular Blancs first. You only run 3 in my version. You could run 4. Thins things out a bit worse in this version. But Sistermon Blanc is the card draw fuel for the deck. It's the primary reason to run the engines over the Archetype version, other than cost, is specifically for card advantage, right? The in-Archetype one does not have card advantage other than Chaperomon. The engine ones that I'm going to show, the entire reason you run them is because you want cards in your hand and to get the cards that you actually want to be playing. So you can use your egg to support your game plan as opposed to using it for a weak draw power strategy. So Sistermon Blanc ST12 is more effective of the 2 base versions. You run 3 base versions and you run 3 Awakened in this, right? So the Sistermon Blanc starter deck 1, you trash 1 card in hand to draw 2. You go +1 card in your hand and toss something that may not be necessary at the stage of the game that you're in, but you can also choose not to trash at all if you just want to get something on the board, right? But with the security ShoeShoemon, which you're not always going to see in security, but some of the things that you pitch off of that, you can play later if they get into your security, and you see that one in particular. But also, the Sistermon Blanc can pitch anything. So if you have an option that you don't need, or if you have a Tamer and you don't need an extra copy of it on the board at the moment, you can throw those 2 to draw 2. It's great. It's a good card. And then BT6 is also an okay option, but instead we'll only draw you 1. So the BT6 basically, for 3 on play, draw 1. If you don't want to trash for your effects, it's still nice. It's just, you're giving up 1 card draw to just not trash something, and it replaces itself in your hand, basically, right? It has no cost to pitching or anything, but you dig less, which is why I prefer the ST12. You want to dig further, faster. And the all turns effects on both of them don't do anything, so don't worry about those. We do not run Huckmon, we do not run Royal Knight's trait stuff, though you could if you were interested, but the decoy for the ST12 one does not matter for anything in this deck because it's black-red, and then all of your Sistermon get blocker is not bad in this version, but I don't think it's good enough to run something like a Magnumon, you know? So we're going to move forward now. Sistermon Blanc Awakened. Sistermon Blanc Awakened is the recursion engine for this deck. Arisa recurs things to the board, but Sistermon Blanc Awakened recurs things to your hand, which is important. So, for 5, on play, you may place one Sistermon Blanc from your hand or trash to recover 1 to your security. That is also the reason why you run her, is you give yourself more time to set up, because this engine doesn't draw quite as much as the next one does. You give yourself more time to set up by throwing things on top of your security and recycling things to get more value. So she helps delay the end state of the game by recovering. But also on deletion, you return a card with Sistermon in name other than Awakened back to your hand from your trash. So you can throw a Sistermon Blanc under her to recover, and then when she goes to your trash, and she eventually will, either through your overclock effect or through going into security, you will recur the Sistermon Blanc under her, or just a random one in your trash, to your hand. It just can't be another Arisa. So basically, you can put something under her. When she dies, you use the EX7 Arisa on board to recur the one that you just got back to your hand onto the board, and then you can potentially give it rush and keep going. Generally, you do not want to pay 5 to play her, because 5 is a lot for a level 3. And she only has 5,000 DP, which is pretty big for a level 3, but not amazing, you know? You'll want to use EX7 Arisa to play her out, because she is a level 3 puppet trait Digimon, but sometimes it's necessary to stop a loss, and also that's why you run Wonder Stomp specifically in this version. You kind of need to, because if you're still doing setup turns, you need to be able to play Blanc for not 5 and keep going. So, we're going to talk about the game plan now. The Sistermon Engine version of this deck, like the Archetypal version and the Chessmon version, is a rush strategy with light control elements through your top end. You'll want to play 1 or 2 setup turns. I talked about this before, but this is like a 1 to 3 setup turn kind of deck, where you put a Shoemon in back, get trainings, Tamers, and play Sistermons or the Searcher Shoemon out front to get important cards in your hand, or things that you don't need in your hand, to your trash. If you have an EX7 ShoeShoe, you Digivolve into it early, potentially to try to get the Rush Arisa on the board so you don't have to pay 4 to get her out, or you can get an EX7 one, but you would rather prefer off of the EX7 ShoeShoe to play the Setter so that you can have setting and also Rush later on, right? And then you spend early turns with your level 3s and Arisa chipping security to get it as low as you can, and cycle into other level 3s to increase cards in your hand and get the pieces that you need. As you are able to Digivolve into Chaperomon and then Cendrillmon, you can use Cendrillmon to attack the first turn that she comes out by deleting the token she makes to attack into security. By the time you're in your top end, there's going to be minus 8k to security. Specifically with this one, there will always be minus 8, which means that your tokens that are rookies can actually swing into security for like 9k to 11k into security. It's just really nice. And then the Sistermon Engine, you can stall for a turn or 2 by swinging early into security with the Sistermon Blanc, like the regular one, and when it hits trash, go into Awaken to recover and make it so you last a little bit longer to get into your top end. This one stalls a bit more than the other one does because it doesn't have quite as consistent card draw as the other one does, that I'm going to be talking about in a moment. By the time you're into Cendrill, after the turn you Digivolve, you can swing twice with her, likely once with your token as well, because you'll most likely have the Rush on board, and the Rush can give the Rush Arisa can give the token Rush immediately. So at least 3 swings in a single turn, and potentially more by floating into stuff if you have another another starter deck Arisa, right? So that's what this one wants to do, is stall a little bit longer than the other versions of the deck so that you can get the cards that you need and go into your top end. And then you have other utility things to help you get there, put as many Tamers as you can on board, and you have aces to protect you. That's basically what this does, is you just like set up, chip for a turn or 2, maybe 3, and then you swing with the rest all at once, maybe the turn after you get into your, like, girl, do it again if you need to, right? So that's what this does in particular. Now, we're going to talk about the shortfalls. This is going to be really similar to when I talk about the shortfalls of the next one, but this one has some extra problems, which is why I would recommend running the Chessmon version instead of this one. But this one is a bit more straightforward and has a slightly different game plan, so we're going to talk about them both separately. The biggest issue with this version of the engine is that if you don't see Shoemon for whatever reason, you cannot get into your top end without hard dropping a level 4 or higher. Sistermon is white. None of your Shoemon go on top of white stuff. That's just how it works. Also, due to how the deck functions, you may not actually get to float into another level 3 when you want to. So because you give all the DP minus effects, Sistermon wants to die so that you can play Sistermon Blanc Awakened, so that she can die so that you can play Sistermon Blanc. You have a specific movement to this one, and the fact that your DP minus strategy helps with everything else can kind of get in the way of your card advantage, which is the problem. Generally, you don't want your level 3s to die late game, so you can use them for deleting for overclock at the end of the turn because of how Awakened works. You want Blanc in the trash, and you want to keep going. There are times when you want Blanc in the trash so you can start to recover to extend your clock, but if they don't die and you don't have a way to delete them, you can't cycle properly. And that's where this one has issues. This one's also slightly more prone to bricking than the Chessmon version, even though you have a higher archetype ratios because of the color issues. It's very fun and very straightforward, but it kind of has some issues in places that it feels like it shouldn't, right? The general problem of this deck overall, the whole Cendrillmon Puppet Rush strategy as a whole, is it loses hard to specific blocker-focused decks, and decks that stop you from playing via effect. The general list of things that you're going to have hard times into is the Rapidmon archetypal deck, so like bunnies. Tyrant. Tyrant is a menace against this, especially if they play Pomumon that stops you from playing by effect. And Magnamon X, you can play into it if they have one Magnamon X, right? You cannot play into it if they have 2 Magnamon X. You have enough guys on board that you can get around like one instance of block. You do not have enough guys on board that you can get around 3 or 4 instances of blocking. That's just how it works, unfortunately. But most decks can't get around 2 Magnamon X's, even with Cheribumon. You do have Cheribumon in this deck that has Alliance, but you're really not going to be clearing that, right? And then Mother Shoto, if it gets late enough in the game, if you do not get to do your rush stuff early, and you should be outclocking them, right, with this deck, but if you cannot outpace the clock on the Mother Shoto deck, if it gets late enough that they have multiple Mothers on board and multiple Shotos on board, you lose. You can't get around that many blockers, especially that many huge blockers with this version of the deck at all. So just keep that out of your mind. This one is, again, prone to bricking and bad into blocks, but all of the versions of this deck are bad into like multiple excessive blocker walls. That's the big problem with it. And then the Rapidmon, all you have to get into security are guys that are too small and will die when you swing. Granted, you can play out guys when your stuff die, but in this deck, I think Sistermon Blanc Awakened gets over it because it's -4. But other than that, you're only going to be able to swing with your top end, and you want to be in a position where you can like rush them down with the rookies that you're playing out off of Arisa. So now we're going to talk about the Chessmon Engine. Much like the Sistermon Engine, it replaces the ST Cheribumon egg with like the level 3 puppet engine to keep up aggro and card draw, right? You're running the EX7 Cheribumon for the security DP minus as opposed to card draw. It focuses on the ST19 black and white PawnChessmon cards to get card draw and stall the game for long enough to get into what you need to push for your closer. Again, deck list behind me, if you didn't notice, but if you want to just look at my version, which has been doing really well by me, that is what I have. It also uses the Miki Megumi Chessmon Tamer to good effect to abuse overclock while adding in extra card draw and memory gain to your whole package, right? This again is a rush aggro strat with minor control elements, and this one is only $99 to upgrade at time of writing over the 2 starter decks, and again, potentially $4 more if you don't have the extra trainings that you need. But it is extremely cheap for an upgrade as far as this stuff goes for a deck that is as competitive as it is, and I am going to talk about it at length. I like this one a lot. So, we're going to talk about the PawnChessmons. These are the big part of the strategy. I run 3 different versions, but you can run 2 if you want. You have options with this, right? So, this engine functions off of PawnChessmon in particular. Specifically, the ST19 versions of White and Black that respectively have on play, trash a puppet card and hand to draw 2, and on deletion to, trash a puppet card to draw 2. You can run 4 of each of them. I run 3 of each, and then 2 of the Royal Knight one, but running 4 of both of them works just fine, sometimes better. Yeah, you can run 2 copies of the white on deletion pawn chess that floats into another pawn chess in your hand for free if it dies on your turn without requiring an Arisa, right? So the Royal Knights one, if it's your turn and it dies, then you can play a level 3 Chessmon in name Digimon card without paying costs. You're not going to activate the second effect where you can play up to a level 5. That's not necessary in this. You just want to play pawn chess. So you're going to be playing the PawnChessmons off of it. This is primarily overclock fuel, the like Royal Knights one, because when you kill it at end of turn, it will immediately float into something that provides card draw or defense for you, which is nice. Also, the black ST19 pawn chess, which I mentioned has the on deletion effect, also gives blocker, which can slow down your opponent's game plan enough that you can make them commit resources to removing it to push for game. So basically you slow them down just a little bit, like 1 or 2 checks off of the black one, and then when it dies you can potentially float into another PawnChessmon, and you also draw off of it. So you run 8 total. You can mix ratios, and technically 4 of each of the starter deck ones works just as well or even better than running the white pawn chess. Just the white pawn chess sets you up for some interesting plays and interesting things within this engine. And also, if you only have 1 EX7 Arisa on board, you can actually get 2 rookies off of it instead of just 1. You can technically get 5 rookies off of it if you have 4 Arisa EX7 on board, though you're almost never going to get to that point without already having won the game. So these guys are great. We love them. Also, it should be mentioned, the white PawnChessmons have an inheritable effect. It does not come up very much, but it does come up. So because all of these cards are yellow, you can Digivolve on top of them with your line. The white PawnChessmons have an inheritable for reboot, so it will, reboot on your opponent's turn, on your opponent's unsuspend step. The black one does not have an inheritable, but it's mostly there for blocker anyway, and you want to use it to block. So if you want to have reboot on your, Cendrillmon, you can Digivolve on top of it, or if you just don't see a Shoemon, you can Digivolve on top of it and keep going. And then we get to Miki and Megumi, which is the dual tamer specifically for the Chessmon deck. So Miki and Megumi dual tamer does a lot of different things for you in this deck. in this version specifically. So for 4, it lets you play a PawnChessmon from hand for free, and because that's playing it via effect, the starter deck Arisa can give that pawn chess that's played from it Rush. Also, all turns, by suspending the Dual Tamer when you play a 2-color black and yellow Digimon, you can suspend the Tamer to draw 1 and gain a memory. So if you have a pawn chess in hand, you can play the Dual Tamer for 3 and draw a card off of it on top of the draw that you're already going to be getting off of the PawnChessmons. So it's very nice. It also enables a fun end-of-turn overclock trick in particular, which makes the deck slightly more effective on the turn after Evo into Cendrillmon. At the end of turn, when you delete your familiar token for overclock, you can pend the ability of the EX7 Arisa to play a level 3 puppet, right? So you go to attack with Cendrillmon and you kill the familiar, and then you put the attack on the stack. And then once you have everything, you will have the attack on the stack, and then you can play something out, a PawnChessmon specifically, off of the Arisa, and then you can tap the Miki Megumi to gain a memory and draw a card. And if you have choked them effectively, by suspending the Dual Tamer, you can take back turn and the attack will still go through. And then Cendrillmon, because overclock is not a once per turn, when you pass turn by playing something or doing anything, taking your game action, whatever, right? You can kill the PawnChessmon that just came out or any other card that you have on the board to then attack again, which is how you put out minus 21,000 DP over varying targets on the same turn. You can do it technically up to 4 times if you could somehow choke them to 1 twice in a row. That's not really possible, but it's technically a thing that could exist if you had a 1-cost card in the deck. But yes, you can retake turn and then do an extra 3rd attack with Cendrillmon, which is who you want to be going into security in the first place. Okay, so now we're going to go into the example of that combo, just so that you can see. I'm going to show you the combo I just mentioned so you can see how it plays and how it functions on board. So we're going to go over to my webcam. We're going to assume a board state here just so that we can, shortcut it, right? Also, we love Captain Cinnabon memory markers here, but we're going to say that the turn starts at 3, right? Which means that they wouldn't have any Digimon on board. You don't really need to worry about it because, you'd get a memory off this, but we're going to say the turn starts at 3. So we're going to start turn. We have like Cendrillmon and some like pawn chess and a chaperone hand. Doesn't really matter. So you Digivolve for 4 into Cendrillmon. Cendrillmon comes out. When Cendrillmon comes out, we go to 1 on the opponent's side, and then we play a familiar token. Also, shout out to Gremcorp. Gremcorp makes custom tokens, makes magic content. I ordered some custom tokens for this deck because I love it. So we are going to play the familiar token out. Familiar token is on the board. And then end of turn, we can use the overclock effect, even though the turn's over, to attack with Cendrillmon into security. We're going to kill the familiar token to then do the attack. So the attack activation goes pending on stack, as well as the familiar minus 3,000 DP. So they could have a like Digimon on the board, whatever. We're just starting with the memory where it is, just so I can explain easy. So let's say they have Digimon on board, even though it doesn't make sense for the scenario, but it's fine. So we do minus 9,000 to something before the attack goes through. They don't have an ace because we kill the thing that was on board. And then because the thing just died, even though the attack hasn't gone through just yet, because something just died, we can now suspend the Arisa, the EX7 Arisa, to play PawnChessmon, the white one, on board, which will then, we are going to tap the Miki and Megumi to gain a memory and draw a card, which goes on before this does, because you can activate your effects how you like, and then Arisa suspends to give this rush, so this can also attack. And then, because PawnChessmon came out, and he's part of our draw engine, we can pitch a Chaperomon that we just drew to draw 2 cards. And then we get like ShoeShoe and another Arisa. That's fine. So the attack goes through, minus 9,000 to their thing that could potentially ace, so it dies. Effect goes through, we check, we're fine because it's minus 8 to their security. And then this has Rush. This was on board already. So we swing with this, check. Let's say it dies, doesn't really matter. They have like a level 6, it'll die. And then we can swing with this, and then it goes through, it lives because there's a smaller guy. So all of this is fine. And then all of this happens, whatever. We Digivolve. We could either Digivolve into the ShoeShoe to just keep going, it's fine. Doesn't really matter now. So you Digi for 2. And we've already done 3 attacks now. So we then go for 2 into this draw. And then we attack with Cendrillmon with Overclock at the end step again by killing this. And then we go into security again, and another minus 6 goes on board. We could have attacked with Cendrillmon before doing anything else as well. So you can technically do 3 different attacks with this setup on the board. And then you can do minus 21 because of your familiar token that does minus 3. And then every attack with Cendrillmon does minus 6. So you can put an amazing amount of control out on the board to get rid of things, get rid of bodies that could ace into stuff, get rid of their boss monsters that are like 12k. Also, if they have like decks and they have no ability to block, you can specifically make the DP minus big enough that they cannot, go into like Dextor Goromon to board wipe you as well. So there are a lot of things that you can do with this to get around stuff, and you have protection to get around them, like deleting stuff via Ace if you have anything else on board. And you will have other things else on board when you're attacking, almost always. All right, so the Chessmon Engine's game plan. The game plan is basically the same as the Sistermon Engine, but with slight variations. So you're going to want to play 1 or 2 setup turns where you put a Shoemon in the back, get trainings, Tamers, and play Pawn Chess, the dual Tamer or the Searcher Shoemon out front to get your important cards in your hand. If you have an EX7 ShoeShoe, Digivolve into it and try to get the Rush Arisa on board so you can have a setter and set up for later turns. And then spend early turns with your level 3s in Arisa, chipping security to get it low, and cycle into other level 3s to increase cards in your hand and get the pieces that you need. You want to be cycling from white to white as much as possible so that you can get more cards, but having black on board to slow down their aggro is also perfectly fine, and you will get a pretty decent amount of value out of it. This version is also less prone to bricking than the Sistermon version because you have more card draw effects, and importantly, you can Digivolve ShoeShoe on top of any pawn chess on the board, preferably white for the reboot, inherit, but any works. And then with this version, you'll also want to abuse the memory advantage, card draw, and floating provided by Pawn Chess, the dual Tamer, and Arisa as much as possible while chipping to get into your top end. Because of how the dual Tamer works, you can swing even more times in a turn if you choke effectively and put out more control by killing with DP minus effects. And a good thing to mention is you have even more ability to get rid of aces on the board. I brought it up when I was showing the combo, but your win attacking effects penned before their ace window, so you can get rid of the bodies that could ace as well if you know how their deck functions, right? So if they only have level 6 aces, then you can kill them before that they can go into them, or if they only have level 5s and they have a level 4 on board, you can easily kill with one swing that. So, be aware of what your opponent's playing and know where to target your DP minuses. The control aspect does play a big role in this deck, depending on what you're doing. All right, we're going to talk about the shortfalls. This list is significantly shorter than the other one, but also it just kind of has the same problems as the other one. This one's problems are that it loses to heavy blocker focused or redirect focused decks. or wipe focus decks fairly hard. So again, we're looking at the same list, like Tyrant, Rapid, Archetypal deck, Magnamon X if they have more than one of the Magnamon X on board, and Mother Shoto are all issues. This one is slightly less bad into Ruin mode though, because you have versions of PawnChess, the black PawnChess, that activates on deletion, so you can still get effects. You're not forced out of card draw just because they have it on board. It should also be mentioned that this can lose hard to Death X or Dex Dorogorum board wipes, even if your float resolves after the like board wipe effect. It just is a problem. You want to get rid of those with DP minus as much as possible instead of doing anything else, because almost all your lower end stuff, except for in the Sistermon Engine, have the same play cost. So Death X will just kill everything, and then everything is the same level, like all the level 3s for the Dex Doragora wipe. This is a highly competitive deck, though. I don't want to make it sound much weaker than it is. It just does have a key weakness that keeps it out of being like tier 1, right? But this is at least like middle of tier 1.5. I'd say it's fairly competitive. It could be closer to the top of it, but I haven't gotten to test it into too many things just yet because, again, the set just came out like a week or two ago. But yeah, I do think that this is going to be doing well. And I think that once we get more support from Cendrillmon in the future, it's going to do even better, especially if we have better like puppet engine pieces. It may also have more like in archetype things that actually matter for card draw and game plan stuff, or even just searching, compared to what we have now. So you may be able to run the archetype version a bit better and maybe a bit cheaper. But yeah, I would highly recommend this deck. I would extremely recommend the Chessmon version because it's extremely cheap and also, you know, really fun. Just really fun. And you can build it however you want. These are just my ideas for it, but you can go with it however you like. We're going to talk about some of the considerations or secondary pieces now. So keep those in mind. They're already going to have been in my deck lists previous, but, you know, just so you're aware. Okay, so cards to consider. Cheribumon Ace. This is in every version of my lists, and for good reason. This card plays exactly into your game plan in all of the ways that you want. So on play or when digivolving, you can play one level 4 or lower yellow or green Digimon card from hand without paying cost, and then give an opponent's Digimon minus 4k for each other Digimon on board till the end of their turn. Does not count Cheribumon Ace, which is important, but you do have a lot of cards on board with this deck generally. This is also your primary piece of blocker removal for all of the decks that I brought up as being the things that are hard for this, like Tyrant, Magnamon X, Mother Shoto, and so on, because it has Alliance, so you can suspend any of your guys to go into things. And the DP minus effect for on play when digivolving lingers into your opponent's turn. So, you know, it's just really good. Your DP minus lingers and you're increasing your board state, which is both things that you really want, and to check security as fast as possible. Also, because it plays via effect, ST Arisa can give the play Digimon Rush if you happen to keep turn off of hard dropping it, which is pretty rare for a 7 cost, but, you know, is a thing that does happen. Also, cards to consider. ShineGreymon Burst Ace. So, another strong DP minus ace that plays into the game plan for a cost of 8 on play or when digivolving. You can play a Tamer from your hand, and then one Digimon gains minus 5,000 for each Tamer you have on board, which does add up quickly. Frequently, you have 3 or 4 on board. Also, when attacking, you may suspend up to 2 yellow Tamers, and it gains security attack +1 for each suspended. Granted, you want to be suspending your Tamers to do effects, but if you're just trying to close out the game, it's really nice. It's one of the best ways to deal with problems on your opponent's turn that you have. Cheribumon Ace can also do that when your opponent attacks, but in a deck that frequently, has issues on that sort of thing in particular, it is a way to get rid of Magnamon X when they attack before they have protection, and that is what it is here for primarily. It's one of the best ways to deal with problems on your opponent's turn, and it also just can get rid of 3 security in one turn, which, because this is a rush deck, can put you within, 1 hit of winning most of the time that you see it. In a deck that frequently makes security minus 6k or more, it's also insane because 15 makes it basically 23,000 DP going into security. And because your Chaperomon inherit is not specific to Puppet Digimon or Cendrillmon, you can protect this by killing a puppet or token as well. Also in the Chessmon Engine, you can play the Dual Tamer off of this because it does not specify the color, but it is yellow-black anyway, so it would be in color combination. And then you can drop a PawnChessmon for free on play as well, which will gain you a memory back and make this effectively cost 7. So it costs the same as hard dropping a Cheribumon Ace, and you will do a ton of DP minus with it. So I've done that before. It does work fairly well. All right, we're going to talk about the options now. So I've brought up Wonder Stomp as being a good option. A lot of people are not super jazzed about it in their testing. I think that they're incorrect, but, everybody has their opinion. And also, there are a lot of effects that specifically the deck doesn't deal with super well, and Heaven's Judgment does. So, I use Wonder Stomp in both versions of the deck that I talked about, and it's also played in the Archetypal version, but because I think drawing and playing for a reduced cost any of my rookies, in addition to synergizing with Rush, is ideal for the deck, but the 2 deck spots can be taken by anything else you think is good, like more aces, or arguably the best removal option, which is Heaven's Judgment behind me. So Heaven's Judgment in either engine version of the deck is incredible, because you can activate it at least 2 times in any situation, like yellow in the immediate one, right? But with any of your engine rookies out, you can activate it 3 times because your Sistermons are white and your PawnChessmons, every single one is black yellow. So you have 2 colors on board at least. And then if you have Cherubi on board also, that is 4 activations because you would have green, yellow, and black or white. Combined with the fact that when you pass turn on it, if Cendrillmon is out, you effectively get an extra activation by using her overclock ability. The board wipe potential is kind of crazy off of this, right? Because you can spread it around with everything. If you have anybody at your locals who runs Tyrant, because Tyrant is immune to your Digimon effects, or a lot of Dexter Goromons, I would honestly recommend it for removal purposes. I love Wonder Stomp, but if you have a really competitive locals that has things that get around certain types of Digimon removal, DP minus on Heaven's Judgment is just great. So yeah, it is a thing that you should consider at all times. Also, we're going to talk about a future card for this deck that synergizes fairly well with it, right? So ShadowSeraphimon Ace comes out next set. So beginning of November, I believe the first week of November. So next set, the big addition is this. It adds more control elements to the deck. If you're interested in the control aspect, it may be better for the Archetype version specifically because of that. But it actually works extremely well with the Chessmon version in particular because it's black-yellow. So for 7, you can either on play or when digivolving for 4 on your turn, or just, when they put you in ace window. You can de-digivolve 3 one of your opponent's Digimon, which is already one of the best effects in the game, and then he is a blocker. So when they attack, you can de-digivolve something 3 times and then block immediately. And when an attack target is switched once per turn, you can give an opponent's Digimon minus 5,000 for the turn. So as soon as he comes out, he's a blocker threat that can get rid of things on board and deprioritizes your opponent blocking your rushdown stuff, which really helps. And in combination with Cendrillmon, when Cendrillmon swings, it'll do -6 to something, and then if they block with something that's not Mother D-Reaper, granted, this will add another -5 to anything on board. So if they have a 12k that they're trying to chump with, you can make it a 1k. It's really nice. really, really nice. It adds more of the control element to it. And because it's a consistent all turns, once per turn effect, you can get a lot of value out of this over the course of the game. It slows the game down heavily for your opponent to set up for your later game aggro, but also it should be remarked that Miki and Megumi only cares about playing a black and yellow Digimon. It does not specifically say it needs to be Chessmon in name. So if you have Miki Megumi on board and you're playing the Chessmon engine, right? You can drop this for 6, and it will de-digivolve. But also, if you ace, Miki Megumi can suspend and gain you memory back while you're doing things, which is not something that I brought up so much in the Chessmon Engine version. But you can also screw over your opponent's memory situation by dropping things on your opponent's turn and tapping the Miki Megumi then. So yeah, it's really nice. You don't get memory on your opponent's turn with this one in particular because you're digivolving on top of stuff, but if you hard drop it, you can reduce it to like 5 if you have both the Miki Megumi dual tamers out. So it is something to think about. It is an extremely good card, and you're going to be seeing it in a lot of decks going forward. So I'm going to talk about the general strategy. We've been over it a bit, but this is just the strategy overall. So basically this deck is one that you play slow on your first 1 to 3 turns to set up so that you can push out and do explosive effects immediately. You set up with your tamers, your engine, Digimon, searchers, and trainings to get where you need to be on your hand size and with things in hand that you need. And then you go wide very quickly while raising into a strong aggro control top end by outputting up to minus 15k DP even on the Sistermon Engine version, and up to minus 21 on the Chessmon version. You can clean up your opponent's board while using your stacks inherits to swing in with your 1 to 3k level 3s and familiar tokens to game them. And you use the EX7 Arisa to play more things if they happen to die, and the ST Arisa to give those rush to keep up the pressure. Remember to be creative with your use of overclock, even when you don't have Cendrillmon on the board. Remember, ShoeShoemon and a Chaperomon both have it. So getting in extra swings, even in non-perfect game states, can accelerate your game plan and put you ahead. Basically, this is a deck that moves up to its top end as quickly as you're able to do, and pushes all at once or in times where you end up bricked after getting up there, because sometimes you just get the 1 stack and a familiar token. You can apply control pressure with your minus DP when attacking and with your familiar on deletion effect to starve them of resources while you push with 2 or 3 hits a turn. It's just a really nice deck. Really nice deck. So that's it for this video. I hope that I've inspired you to at least look at the deck or try it in the sim. Please like and subscribe and share this with your community or friends who are getting into the competitive scene or would like to try out an interesting deck that not a lot of people are on at the moment. My Twitter and Twitch are LainTCG. If you watch me on Twitch, which I'm streaming a bit more frequently, currently I'm starting to play Tekken 8, so if that's something that you're interested in. But I also do a lot of testing on there. So, be aware. My model on the right here is by Be a Big Shot or at Arabiataho on Twitter. My cursor model, which I use for testing on stream, is by my friend VeniVidiVT, which is at VeniVidiVT _VT on Twitter and on VGen. My banner is by Yo-Yoms on Twitter. My logo is by Pinky Bird on Twitter and VGen. The tokens that I showed off in the testing thing are by GremCorp on Twitter and Twitch. Also, shout out to Captain Cinnabon for the memory things. I get from them all the time. I would just recommend them highly in general. And then the Nide win art from earlier is by Arena Lycoris on VGen. Makes a lot of specifically that. But yeah, so that's about it. I hope that you thought that this was interesting, and I hope that you try out this deck, and good luck at your locals. Have a nice week.